Hi, I'm Shar Pittman, and welcome to our episode on childhood trauma. We're going to talk today about the effects of childhood trauma and how it affects our life as adults and the things that we can do different. So, Wendy,
yes,
you made a comment in the last episode, and I hope everybody watches that. It'd be great to watch that one before you watch this one.
Yeah.
The definition first of trauma is it's an emotional response that is caused by experiencing a distressing or a traumatic event. Mm-hmm. And you made the comment that not everybody's trauma, how'd you say that? Not everybody's trauma it's a perception. It's my perception.
Exactly right. And we don't have the right to judge anybody else's trauma.
Right. So the things that I've gone through might not be a big deal to you, but it was mine. It was my life. It was my history, my childhood, my story. Mm-hmm. And then you said that we live what we've learned.
Right.
And that's a really powerful statement because I think a lot of people are living life with certain behaviors that you don't want to be living. You don't want to act. You were saying earlier, we'll go through some of those things. If you grew up in a critical home, you become critical and judgmental. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's something that you don't want to be, but you don't really know like how to come out of those things. So that's what we want to really discuss in this episode is how trauma, undealt with trauma, has a effect in our life, how it affects us emotionally, how it affects us mentally, it affects us physically, affects us relationally, and even spiritually. Yeah,
absolutely. Because we become what we live.
We become what we live, yeah.
And I think one of the things that I hear from people often is they will have a relationship with someone and they'll say something like, you're just like your mother. Mm-hmm. And it's like the biggest criticism ever because the person doesn't even like their mother.
Yeah.
Right. But they're acting in that way because it's become an unconscious process.
Yeah.
Because that's the way they learned to be in the world. That was their example.
Yeah.
There's also a process of projection where we can take our experience with one person and we can project the qualities and experience that we've had with that person onto another person that has a similar role in our life. A real easy example of that is if you've had a really difficult boss in one place, you will say, this boss is also as difficult. If you had a difficult relationship with a parent, you might project that on your spouse. I think that's the thing we see the most. Yeah. If you have a really deceptive, manipulative, critical parent in your life, you might look at your spouse and say, you're very deceptive and critical. And your spouse is going, no, I'm not. What are you talking about? I'm not like that at all. Yeah. So it muddies the way we see ourselves. It muddies the way that we see other people. It cuts off our peace and our joy. And it's just sad. Yeah. It's so sad. Yeah. 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 So sad.
So why don't you go ahead and go through some of those things that you were talking about earlier.
Sure.
You were reading them and it was so good.
Great. I read them kind of fast at the end because our crew here was saying, we're almost out of time. And I'm like, I got to get these in there. So I think I want to start by just talking about how we have an inauthentic sense of self because we were raised in a very critical environment or an environment where we were told our thinking and our thoughts and our feelings and our perceptions were completely wrong. So we try to become what other people want us to be. Kids that have gone through some childhood trauma are amazing at reading the nonverbals of other people because they've had to do that to keep themselves safe. And when I say safe, I don't just mean safe from physical harm. Right. I mean safe from hurt feelings. As simple as that. Right. It's I need to keep myself safe from that criticism that I don't know how to process. Yeah. I need to keep myself safe from feelings of abandonment and withdrawal. So I'm going to read what you want. And I'm going to become what you need because I don't want to have any negative experiences in my relationship with you. So people become very unsure of who they even are. Yeah. Some people don't even have a concept of who they are because they've been told their whole life that their instincts of interpretation for the world or the way that they're behaving is wrong. Yeah. So they don't trust themselves. Yeah. If I had more people that would spend time validating their children's feelings and experiences, I would spend a lot less time in my office trying to get adults to validate their feelings and experiences.
That's really good. Yeah.
That I have so many
That's
adults
so
that just
true.
don't trust their feelings, don't trust their judgment because people have always told them that they're wrong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we don't mean to do that to our kids, but
Right.
that is what we do.
Right.
So when people are being raised in that environment that's just critical, they don't feel and have a perception of who they are. So I'll become what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you walk around in the world becoming what 30 other people want,
That's
that's so stressful.
it's so stressful.
So anxiety provoking.
Yeah.
Because
That's
you're
the
never
truth.
really settled and living in your own spiritual self.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of insecurities come from.
Absolutely.
A lot of the competition, the jealousy, especially in the women, because you're trying to be with someone what you think that they want you to be, and then you don't even know that's really what they want you to be.
Right.
It's just your interpretation of what you think they want you to be. So then you try to become, I always call that a chameleon. It's just like, I'm one way with you because this is what I think you expect. And I'm one way with you. And I love that how you say that, is that we really do have a relationship with ourselves.
We do.
And
Absolutely.
it's like learning, when we realize that, it's like, we wouldn't treat somebody else the way that we treat ourselves.
Right.
And the things that we say to ourselves, and the things that, that we do to ourselves, just, in our thoughts and stuff like that.
We wouldn't talk to another person the way we talk to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true.
We wouldn't care for another person the way we're not caring for ourselves.
Yeah.
It's so not loving. And the one person that you bring everywhere with you is yourself.
Yeah.
And if you don't like yourself,
Yeah.
how are you going to find joy?
Yeah.
How's that going to happen?
Do you think not liking yourself is linked to some kind of traumatic
Absolutely.
event in our life?
Absolutely.
Somewhere
because
along.
our original design is not to not like ourselves.
Correct. Yeah.
God and people, especially Christians, will get into this perception of, oh, that's being self-absorbed or lovers of self.
Yeah.
And really, if we want to look biblically, there's so many times in the Bible where God tells us, love your neighbors as yourself. Love your wife as you love yourself.
Yeah.
So there's a thought there that we love ourselves.
Yeah.
Because God made me just the way I am, and he didn't make me a mistake. And he made me for his design and his purpose. So when we don't like ourselves, it's like looking at our creator and saying, you got me wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got me wrong.
You messed up.
You messed up.
Yeah.
And when you can become when you can love yourself, God can just use you.
Yeah.
Because you love your design.
Yeah. And then your perspective and your perception of life and of relationships and things are so different because it's through that lens of, okay, I'm okay. And like I said in the last episode, we're not our trauma. Our trauma does not have to determine my destiny.
Right.
It doesn't have to determine my purpose.
Right.
But when I become healed of that, now that trauma becomes my testimony.
Amen.
And now that testimony can now get somebody else free because now my trauma isn't defining me.
Right.
I'm defining my trauma.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
I'm using that as a platform and saying, no. I'm not going to be judgmental. My dad was the most judgmental person in the entire world. But now I know why he was the most judgmental, because he had a dad that was the same.
Right.
And so when I understand that, I don't look at my dad as being bad.
Right.
I just look at him as being broken. And he did what only he knew. But now I have the opportunity to say, whoa, hold the phone.
Yep.
I don't have to carry that over into my life.
Exactly.
And so that healing process, and it really is a process. It's like, I've had so much healing, but I think there still is some healing to come because as things come up, it's like, oh, wait a minute, that was rooted in that. So now I don't have to behave like that. No, that's really not,
Right.
I don't have to look at that person so critically because that's just kind of a learned behavior.
Right. If you grew up in a very critical environment, the way that you were taught to perceive the world was to be critical.
Right.
If you grew up in a judgmental, and especially a negatively judgmental, most of the time, humans tend to judge things to the negative. We don't look at things and say, oh, I love that about that person.
Right.
We'll look at somebody and say, I don't like those 3 things about that person.
Right.
And when you're raised in that kind of an environment, it just intensifies that.
Yeah.
So you were criticized a lot, so you become very critical of other people.
Yeah.
You were shamed a lot, so you become very shaming of other people.
Right.
Oh, how could you do that?
Yeah.
That's just awful. I can't believe you made that choice.
Yeah.
If you were belittled a lot, you become belittling.
Yeah.
I've worked with a lot of bullies.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, most all the bullies I've ever worked with have been very bullied at home.
Yeah.
and they come to school and they take that anger out on people. Insecure people, part of their process of gaining a sense of security is to make other people feel insecure. Because if they point out the negative of someone else, they feel like everyone's looking at that person. They're not looking at me.
Them. Yeah.
They're looking at that person's issues, not mine.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself also, one of the ways you can tell that that you have a deep sense of insecurity about who you are as a person is if you consistently need a lot of validation from other people about the choices you make.
Okay.
If you're constantly saying, oh, what do you think? Is this what I should do? If this is what I should do? And you ask 10 different people, I can tell you if you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different responses. Your circle of people who influence you in your life and whose opinions really matter should be very small. And it should be people you admire.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So if you have this inauthentic sense of self, this false self, this chameleon, this insecurity, that's usually rooted in childhood trauma.
Yeah.
You become very critical of others. We like to point out other people's flaws, cause other people to feel insecure so we can feel a little bit better. We become perfectionists because perfection was demanded of us. Oftentimes people who have had grown up in these invalidating, critical environments become perfectionists. They become very achievement focused because a lot of times those kids were validated for achievements. They were validated for good grades. They were validated for good performances on a sports team. So they become the overachievers because they don't believe that they can be validated, and they're unable to validate themselves for simply who they are. That the who of who they are that they bring to the table is what's valuable. It's not what they achieve. Yeah. So they're the people that are running around like crazy people. And I used to be one of those people. I totally used to be one of those people that I thought my whole worth was in what I achieved and how I could provide for people until I learned that I was running myself ragged and nothing was really changing. Yeah. 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 They're the people that are always pretend like they have to be strong because when they were a kid, there was no time to stop and say, or no one helped them in that process of saying, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? And that's important. It was just, stop it. Stop crying. Stop crying. I don't want to deal with your feelings. As parents, there's a process that we have to teach our kids how to have feelings and what to do with them. So when they come into my office as adults that don't know how to have feelings, don't want to have feelings, and then they wonder why they can't attach in a relationship. Right. Because you don't want to have feelings. Right.
You're scared of your feelings.
You're scared of your feelings.
Right. And that's one of the effects of undealt with trauma is you don't know your feelings get all jacked up. You don't know how to deal with them. So then, you become more angry. I think you said that earlier. It's just like somebody that is, that was, young and not being able to deal with your feelings. You just become angry. And so you don't know how else to respond.
And at the root of a lot of anger is hurt. Yeah. It's a lot of hurt and unmet need. Yeah. But the protective way that we process hurt is to allow it to morph into anger. If we would really start looking at what am I hurting about? Yeah. And talking to each other. One of the most impactful things you can do with a couple when you're doing couples counseling is get them to stop talking to each other what they're angry about and talking to each other about what they're hurt about. Because if I looked at you as my friend and I said, what you did, this really hurt me. Yeah. I was really sad and this hurt me. That's different than me looking at you and saying, wow, you made me mad. Yeah. Right? Right. It's a different thing.
That's really good. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes people become like passive aggressive and hide their feelings. Oh man, I really hate people who are passive aggressive. Yeah. And women, we are not taught how to appropriately deal with confrontation. I mean, if you really wanted to do a study of passive aggressiveness, go to a junior high girls' slumber party. It's like everybody's passive aggressive and everybody's pointing out the flaws of everybody else because they're so insecure about their own flaws, right? Instead of directly handling things in your relationships, you become passive aggressive. Yeah. Yeah. So so trauma really affects emotions.
it also affects us, I believe, mentally, you know, because I know the two are connected, the mentally and emotionally, it's really connected. But I think that mentally is kind of how we really like think, you know, emotions are like how we feel. And then it really can affect us physically. So you've got all of those things that are like, it's so you look at it and people are like, well, it's no big deal. Just, you know, especially in society. Well, back when I was growing up, it was you push everything under the rug.
Absolutely.
Do not talk about the elephant in the room. There's
Never.
this great big huge elephant walking around and you can't talk about it. It's pooping in your living room, but you can't even clean it up because it's not there.
Right.
But it's there, you know? And so it affects us in such a way that it's like even physically, it can affect you physically. And so the importance of seeing that the things that I've gone through as a child has affected me as an adult, but it's not defining who I am because I don't want to be like that.
Right.
I do not want to behave the way that I'm behaving. And so it's finding out where that behavior came from so that I can deal with it.
Right.
And so when I realized that why am I so judgmental and critical? I hate that about me. You know, then you go, okay, wait a minute. That was a learned behavior. That is what my dad did. That is how he probably was raised. And so now it comes to light and I'm like, what in the world? So then now my insecurities are going away because I'm looking at people not through the eyes of being judgmental or critical, but I'm looking at them completely different because I see them as not out to get me.
Right.
That's another one.
It's huge.
Is, you know, they're out to get me, or this suspicious thing. There's always this, you know, suspicious of this person trying to get me, or they're talking about me, or, you know, they don't like me and all those things is because of my insecurities.
Right.
Because of something that happened when I was little, something that I learned and how I, you know, dealt with
how you process things.
I process things.
How you process things. Because how we process things becomes our thoughts. And our thoughts cause our feelings. What we think becomes our feeling, and how we feel creates our behavior.
Right.
So if our thoughts become clear and we go, oh, that's why I'm doing that. And then we do the work to actually change the way we think.
Right.
Our life breaks open for us. It really just does. Yeah. So to have that awareness, though, we have to step in to our experiences and not withdraw from those experiences. So we have to take that moment and step into that. We need to challenge ourselves to be emotionally intimate with other people. Because one of the things that we know childhood trauma causes is an inability to just be emotionally intimate with people. Because if you don't like yourself, one of the things that most people will say is attractive in a relationship with another person is their level of confidence. If they're confident in who they are. Now, I'm not perfect by any stretch. And I am honestly not everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah.
You know, my approaches aren't everybody's cup of tea. But I am good with who I am.
Yeah.
I'm really good with who I am. The faults, the experiences, the things I've done wrong in my life. One of the things also that we do as adults is we look back through our childhood and sometimes our choices that we were making, what we perceive to be our choices through the eyes of an adult instead of through the eyes of the child that was making those choices at the time. And we have a lot of shame that comes from that. So if you grow up in an environment that's not teaching you how to have feelings, the perceptions, how to have relationships, because your caregiver is unavailable and not wired in that way, which I think most people in our generation would say was true.
Yeah.
You know, then we don't learn to have relationships. We don't learn how to make those choices, and we don't learn to even think about our thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things I like to encourage people to do is to say, if you made a choice when you were 14, you need to look back at that choice through the eyes of a 14-year-old, not through the eyes of a 50-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, think about a 14-year-old, you know, they're impulsive.
Right.
They don't know everything they think they do, but they don't.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And that's a way that you can start beginning to process your trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good.
I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
People also become, when they've experienced a lot of childhood trauma, which comes with this just kind of invalidating sense of self and confusion. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just vastly confusing.
Yeah.
They get very anxious. And out of that anxiety, they could become controlling. So there are people that other people will say, oh my gosh, you're so controlling.
Yeah.
That's kind of how that plays out in our life too.
So the controlling people, you think that it comes from that just being, because if they're full of anxiety because of something that happened, you know, that's what comes up as anxiety. So they control because control keeps them from being anxious.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Right. If you're growing up in an environment that's confusing, that you don't understand, that people aren't helping you to understand. So something happens, and it can be the death of a grandparent, and all of a sudden Nona's just not there anymore. And no one's helping you process that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's somebody in your family had an illness for a while, and no one's helping you process why mom's just not as available right now. No one's helping you understand what's happening to you. The world becomes confusing and it doesn't feel safe. And so because you don't feel safe, you become an anxious adult who tries to control things.
Yeah, because you don't want to be anxious.
Because you don't want to be anxious, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
And that control gives you some kind of power, you know, and you don't really have power over your feelings. You don't, you know, you feel like you don't have power over your feelings. And so control is kind of the way to go.
Right. Adults that are raised in that also tend to have really low self-esteem. If you struggle with who you are as a person and struggle with understanding and validating your experiences and just doing the work to understand yourself, you have pretty low self-esteem. A lot of black and white thinking, a lot of fear of failure. And I think the thing that I see the most is they have a lot of relationships that end before they want those relationships to end. They don't understand why people don't want to be around them.
Or they don't, or they don't understand why they don't want to be around people.
Right.
You know, because they really do, but they can't.
We all crave relationship.
Yeah,
I mean, as human beings, we are wired to be in a relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, our creator created us because he wanted a relationship with us.
Right.
And we're created in his image. So we're wired for relationship, and we want that. We want that closeness.
Right.
But if what life has taught us is that if I'm close to somebody, it hurts. We don't want to be close to people. So then we can never feel very deeply loved and accepted by those that are trying to deeply love us and accept us.
Right. Because we feel like maybe because if we're living as a victim from trauma, then we feel like we're not worthy of being loved.
Right.
We're not worthy of relationships. So we sabotage those relationships before they can form.
And we don't have any skills to work out the bumps in the road of a relationship.
Yeah.
I think a really good analogy for a relationship is a relationship's like a garden. Okay. And every once in a while, you got to pull the weeds out of the garden so the good stuff grows.
Yeah.
And when we don't have any skills in a relationship to do that, we end relationships quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So trauma really undealt with and not dealing with it and getting past it really affects, as you can see, a lot of areas of our life. It affects us relationship wise. It affects us mentally, emotionally, physically. And so the next episode we're going to talk about is some tools on how we can get free from that and live free and be able to process things in a healthy manner. So thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Childhood Trauma of Woman of Purpose. And join us the next episode as we talk about the tools and things that we can do to be able to live free from trauma. Have a good day.